Good evening, everyone. Happy holiday weekend. It is Friday, December 23rd, and we are entering this last week of 2022. As you can see, I am joined by two very important and very much appreciated guests. We have Dan Kovalik. He's a professor. He is a human rights lawyer, and he is the author of several books, many of which I've read, as well as Scott Ritter is joining us today, a former UN weapons inspector and former Marine Corps officer. And, before we get started, make sure that you're liking this stream, make sure you're subscribing, hitting that notifications bell, and of course, supporting this work. All the links in the description at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can join here on YouTube. It's very much appreciated. But let's get started because we have about a little under an hour with our guests today. So first, I want to go to you, Scott, because a lot has been happening, and we're going to talk a lot about Ukraine today because a lot has been happening in the last several days. But in the last several weeks, there's been this intense battle in the city of Bakhmut, and I wanted to ask you, because the Western mainstream media has been kind of sounding the alarm a bit. You've had places like The Guardian, the New York Times talk about how Ukraine has been using artillery and all sorts of weapons at alarming rates, to the point where it seems like they're admitting that Ukraine is outgunned here. And I wanted to ask you, what is your assessment of the situation right now on the ground in Bakhmut? And going forward, as we enter this winter phase of this proxy war going on in Ukraine?
Well, first of all, let's understand that the battle for Bakhmut has been taking place for many months now. This is not a new phenomenon. Bakhmut is the Gordian knot of the Ukrainian defensive belt that exists in Donetsk, a defensive belt that has been constructed on a continuous basis since 2014. It's one of the most extensive fortified defense systems in modern history. It is manned with troops. It has the support of heavy equipment, artillery, etc. And the Russians have been in the business of grinding it down for many weeks, and what we see right now is basically we're reaching the culmination of all the Russian effort. I always laugh when people say, how could Ukraine be outgunned? I don't know. Maybe because they only have X number of artillery pieces, and the Russians have X times 10. Simple Marine math. I mean, I'm not a mathematician. I'm not somebody with a PhD in calculations, but I know that when I have more artillery pieces than you, I'm going to win that fight, generally speaking, especially if it's positional warfare, where you've made it really easy for me by sitting in your positions that I can identify using my intelligence resources and pound you into submission. This fight has there's two aspects to this fight. One is that the Russians are more than happy to let the Ukrainians sit in place and suffer casualties. Oftentimes, the Ukrainian battalion will rotate into the front lines and a matter of days later rotate out, suffering 60% casualties without ever having seen a Russian. So they just show up and they die, and then they leave, and another battalion comes in. And that's the thing, that Ukrainians are, rotating battalions. It's every once in a while the Ukrainians will fail to rotate in on time, leave some sort of chink in their armor. And if that time is right, then the Russians will carry out an assault on that position. This is extraordinarily bloody combat, close quarters combat of the most intimate nature. Face to face in a trench, hand grenades, knives, bayonets, rifle stocks, bullets at close range. And the Russians tend to prevail, seize the position, and then they wait and they start the process of grinding down the next position. The goal of the Russians, of course, is to kill as many Ukrainians as possible. And fortunately for Russia, Ukraine is giving them plenty of opportunity to do just this by their tactics. One has to wonder, at what point in time the Ukrainians will recognize that the price of holding on to Bakhmut is too high, that Ukraine would be better off preserving these forces, some of whom are well trained, and using them as a mobile defense, capable of at least lowering the casualty ratio. Right now, Russia's enjoying an 8 to 10 to 1 casualty ratio, primarily because Russia can exploit its artillery advantage. Even when Ukraine has modern Western artillery, such as the M777 from the United States, the HIMARS, other artillery systems from other NATO countries, they don't exist in sufficient quantity to level the battlefield. Ukraine is, on occasion, able to score an impressive hit on a command and control facility. Let's not pretend the Ukrainians can't fight. They can. Let's not pretend the Ukrainians aren't lethal. They are. When we speak of a 10 to 1 casualty ratio, understand that if we're saying that Ukraine is suffering 500 to 800 casualties a day, that means Russia's suffering 50 to 80 casualties a day. During the Vietnam War, at the height of the Vietnam War, the United States was suffering around 200 lethalities a week, and we considered that to be, a difficult pill for us to swallow. So the Russians are suffering greater losses than we suffered at the height of the Vietnam War. So let's not pretend that Russia's getting away from this conflict, injury-free. They're paying a tremendous price. If we say, for instance, that the Ukrainians have suffered over 100,000 dead, which I actually believe the number is probably double that, that means that the Russians have suffered 20,000 dead. That's a lot of dead. So let's, even though we say that Russia has the advantage, it's a meat grinder, understand that it's grinding up Russian meat as well. But Bakhmut is about to fall. When it does, the Russians will have achieved a strategic victory of some importance. They will have broken through the defensive belt that the Ukrainians have constructed in the Donetsk Republic, and they will be able to roll up the Ukrainian defensive lines. And here's the important part: they have 150,000 troops finalizing their training who are going to show up. That's 10 to 15 division equivalents, show up with the most modern equipment that Russia has in its inventory: the T-90 tank, the T-80 tank, the advanced versions of the T-72 tank, infantry fighting vehicles, artillery, etc. And they will be able to exploit the situation. So I think the Ukrainians are in for a very, very difficult period of time going forward, and that the Russian pressure will be relentless, and it will not end until Russia has achieved its stated objectives in the special military operation.
Yeah, I want to kick it to you, Dan, with a question that Scott definitely afterward, please jump in. But I wanted to ask you, Dan, about your impression of this meeting that just happened between Joe Biden and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Right, he was flown in by the Pentagon. There was a lot made about it in the U.S. and Western mainstream media. You had Joe Biden say, well, during the press conference with Zelenskyy, say, well, Ukraine can't get all of the weapons that it wants because NATO doesn't want World War III with Russia. And then there's been all this talk about Patriot missiles, and we know that $45 billion more was just passed for Ukraine in the next year in this omnibus bill. What do you think is the significance of this? What was your impression of this visit, given that so much was made about it in the media?
Well, I think it was interesting. It was mixed. I mean, in the sense that the optics were certainly that Zelenskyy got this hero's welcome. He was compared, of course, to Winston Churchill, who visited the White House during World War II. Of course, Churchill happened to be fighting the Nazis, and Zelensky's on the side of the Nazis. But in any case, but he was given a hero's welcome here by the president in Congress and by the media, of course. But that was also accompanied by really a lack of material support that he's going to go home with, right? He wanted a lot more than what he got. He got one, and Scott, you can finish this because I don't know the correct word, but he got one Patriot missile something. I don't know what that. What's that?
Battery.
Thank you. He wanted much more. He wanted artillery. He wanted more than one Patriot missile battery. So all the hype, all the pomp and circumstance seems to be dwarfed by the fact that he didn't get much. And it seems to me that that's a signal that maybe Ukraine fatigue is sinking in. And by the way, I hope that's the case. It should have sunk in a long time ago. I think we need to stop funding this effort because I think it's, by the way, futile. It's just going to lead to the death of more Ukrainians and Russians as well. But in any case, that is my takeaway, that despite all the appearances, the U.S. largely said no to this guy and sent him on his way. And to me, that's the takeaway.
Yeah, Scott, do you want to jump in about what you thought about this visit?
It was a made-for-TV moment. Hollywood couldn't have written a better script. The brave Ukrainian president visiting the frontline troops, ostensibly in Bakhmut, but we don't know because we didn't hear any artillery fire in the background, and allegedly Bakhmut's being struck by an artillery shell every minute. But he awarded medals to the brave heroes of Bakhmut, one of whom gave his medal back to Zelenskyy and begged that he give it to the president of the United States. Then they all bravely signed a flag that Zelenskyy brought, and of course he brought it with him to the session of joint House, joint session of Congress, and he gave it to Speaker Pelosi with much fanfare. I mean, my God, it couldn't have gotten any more dramatic than this. Nancy Pelosi said it was the greatest speech ever delivered before the House of Representatives. The greatest speech ever delivered before the House. I will tell you this right now. For the greatest speech that was ever delivered, I don't think Nancy Pelosi could tell me right now one line from that speech. It was the most forgettable speech ever delivered before the House of Representatives. In fact, it's a speech that will have been forgotten in the House of Representatives this time next week, this time next month, as reality steps in. Zelenskyy didn't come here to be anything more than window dressing for a domestic political moment. You see, we have a lame duck Congress, and they're being asked to push through a $45 billion defense expenditure package that normally would be reserved for next year, the next Congress. They don't need the money now. There's already money that's allocated. This is money that's going to be used for next year. Why don't they wait till next year? Because there's Republicans taking over the House of Representatives who might start, or probably will start, asking some very uncomfortable questions, such as, hey, where does all this go? What have you done with the stuff we've already given you? You say you want more, but how do we know what we've already sent you hasn't been siphoned off into the pocket of people or into the black market coming back? We'd like some accountability. This would be a very difficult discussion for the Biden administration because they don't have answers, because they've refused to appoint an inspector general. They don't have any accounting procedure. Right now, they are going through the motions of sending so-called on-site inspectors on the ground in Ukraine to investigate the status of the weapons that have been sent in, trying to build from scratch a documentary record that should have existed in any normal way of doing business. Just telling you right now, when the U.S. provides weapons to another nation, we document this. There's our receipts signed. There are barcodes on many of these weapons, and we track them to make sure that they're used in accordance with the legal framework that has been built into whatever agreement that's been put in. With Ukraine, we've given them carte blanche. They can do anything they want with no accountability. And as a result, much of these weapons aren't making it to the front line, especially the lighter weapons, the javelins, the stingers, the machine guns, the grenades, the mines, the explosives. They're being siphoned off. It's sort of like, back in the good old days in New Jersey and New York, when the shipment of the newest Adidas came in at the port, and they load them in the truck, and oh my gosh, a couple boxes bounced out of the truck on the way to the store. Well, they bounced out of the truck into the back trunk of somebody who drove off and then would sell them on the side. This is what's happening. We literally have mercenaries saying, we're in a convoy, and 2 trucks at the end of the convoy peeled off and disappeared. They were full of munitions and weapons, but they just went their own way instead of going to the front lines. So Biden and the proponents of this conflict don't want to answer those questions. So they're using this lame duck session to push through a $45 billion spending bill, which, by the way, is going to pass no matter what. There was no question that this wasn't going to pass. So what is Zelensky's purpose? Zelensky's purpose is to provide political cover for this vote. Because now Zelensky has come in and he's begged, he's pleaded. Okay, but the joke is on him and on everybody else, because Zelensky went off script. He wasn't supposed to, but he did. He was just supposed to come in and say, yes, give me some help, da-da-da. Oh, $45 billion, thank you very much. You know, Slava Ukraina, Slava America. But no, Zelensky had the gall to say, Patriots, yeah, I'd like a second battery, please. You know, we're sort of out of tanks. I'd like your tanks, the M1 Abrams. I'd really like some of those. I'd like some of your Bradley fighting vehicles. I'd like some of the equipment that we need if you want us to win this war. Because you do want us to win this war, don't you? This is all about, right? You want us to do the fighting to win the conflict against Russia that you've provoked and you're promoting. So you're going to help me win this war, are you not? And Joe Biden's answer was, no, we're not going to help you win this war. You're not going to win this war. You're going to lose this war. And it's not just Joe Biden saying that. Remember, General Zelenskyy, who's the commander of the Ukrainian armed forces, gave an interview to The Economist last week where he all but admitted the war is lost. He didn't come straight out. He did it indirectly. But the interesting thing is the interview that he gave, Zelenskyy was at the table. The commander-in-chief, the president, didn't say a single word. Just sat there as the general took over, which tells you something about who's really in charge right now. But the general said, I can beat these guys, meaning the Russians. I can beat them. Well, every general says that. No general gets his stars by saying, I can't beat them. He said, I can beat them, but I'm going to need 300 tanks, 500 infantry fighting vehicles, 500 artillery tubes, and an endless amount of ammunition. In short, he basically was replicating the scene out of the movie Downfall in the basement in Berlin with Adolf Hitler and his generals. If you've ever seen the movie, if you haven't seen the movie, see it. It's brilliant. But Hitler's sitting there and, you know, he's pounding the table, moving imaginary armies. Where's Steiner? Where's Wendt? Why aren't they attacking? Why aren't they doing this? If they would just listen to me, we would win this war. Well, there weren't any armies. It was imaginary that he was pushing around. There was nothing left. And Zelensky's at that point. Give me this huge army. And we're talking a lot of equipment here. And I can win this war. Well, hey, General, I could win this war if you gave me that army. Danny, you could win the war. Dan, you could win. All of us could win this war if we were just given the imaginary army that General Zelenskyy was imagining. But then Zelenskyy was doing this for a reason. Because then he said, you know, the Russians, they're not that bad. They're actually pretty good. And they've got this mobilization going on, and they're going to be ready pretty soon to start carrying out offensive operations. And if I don't have the things I've asked for, there's not much I can do. The Russians are going to win. And there was the dime, dropped right on the table. The Russians are going to win. And that was the cover. Basically, hey, the West, you got us all ginned up here. Now it's time for you to step up to the table. I need this army to do the job that you want us to do. Without this army, they're going to beat me. So Zelenskyy came here and he said, you know, I heard Zelenskyy ask for stuff, so I'm going to ask for it. And Biden said, no, what does this mean? Because here's the important thing. We know Ukraine is going to lose this war. We know it. I mean, General Petraeus can get on TV and spout nonsense. General Hertling, all these retired generals with 1 million stars. I mean, there might as well be a galaxy up there with all the stars that appear on TV. And they can all say the same thing, how bad the Russians are, how brave the Ukrainians are. And you know what? It is bunk, 100% bunk. The Ukrainians have lost this war. They're losing this war, and there's no way they can win this war. And Joe Biden recognizes this, and that's why he said, you're not going to get the help you've asked for because we don't want to put you in a position where we escalate this conflict to the point of a NATO-Russian direct conflict. We can't have that. So you're not going to win. You can't win. We're not going to allow you to win. I mean, think about it. The Patriot missile battery that we're sending takes 5 months minimum to train up a Patriot missile operator. Okay, let's say we start now. We're not. It's going to take a little bit of time. That means they're not going to get one till May. I happen to believe that a lot's going to happen on the ground between now and May, and none of it's going to be good for Ukraine. And so this war may be over or on the verge of being over by the time the Patriot comes in. Why do the Ukrainians need the Patriot missile? because right now their critical infrastructure is being eviscerated by daily Russian missile attacks that their current air defense system can't shoot down. So what is our solution? To give them one battery of Patriot missiles that don't work, by the way. Check the operational history of this system. Couldn't shoot down an Iraqi Scud, shot down more Allied aircraft than Iraqi missiles in 2003. It couldn't protect the strategic infrastructure of Saudi Arabia. The system don't work. But we're going to give one battery, and it's going to be deployed in May. What's that say to the Ukrainians? We can't stop the Russians from destroying your infrastructure. Not only can we not, we're not going to stop. So Ukraine's going to get eviscerated for 5 months. The system that we're going to bring in is incapable of solving the issue under the best of circumstances. It's not enough. It doesn't work. And frankly speaking, every Ukrainian who's manning it, you're going to die. I'm telling this right now to any Ukrainian soldier watching this. Don't accept the assignment to go get trained in Germany. Yes, you'll get beer. Yes, the women are pretty. Yes, it's going to be warm, but you're going to die. When you go back to Ukraine, they're going to put you in a death trap called a Patriot missile battery that is the biggest target Russia's looking for, and they will kill you, and they will kill everything about you. Don't do it. But this should be said to every Ukrainian soldier right now, because what has the United States said? We are abandoning you. We are literally acting out on Lindsey Graham's perverted little fantasy that we are going to fight to the last Ukrainian. He said that. I'm not making it up. He said that. So now we have Ukraine trying to fight, trying to win, trying to do something, and we're not going to let them. All we want them to do is to fight to the last Ukrainian. For what purpose? To bring as much harm to Russia as possible. I don't know how to better define literally what evil is. Evil is the American policy towards Ukraine, because it's not about doing good. It's not about good defeating evil. It's not about helping anybody. It's simply about allowing a nation to die. And it's not Russia that's dying. Allowing a nation we ostensibly call our friends to die the most horrific death. The U.S. policy towards Ukraine is the definition of evil. And those who are implementing it are evil people.
Yeah, well, I wanted to transition then, because I've been thinking about this a lot too, given that we've had weeks upon weeks now of, Stoltenberg, of the Biden administration, Ned Sullivan, right? We've had them kind of talk about, well, sure, we could have a dialogue about peace, but let's first make sure that Ukraine is winning the war. That's how they've been kind of framing it lately. And I wanted to kick it to you, Dan, for your opinion on this. You have on the one hand the Western mainstream media saying that Russia is in fact the one that was kind of being very disingenuous about diplomacy, all so it could prepare for this Ukraine moment, right? But on the other hand, you have the same Western media, for example, the German media interview with Angela Merkel, where it was revealed from the former German chancellor that, in fact, the Minsk Accords were nothing but a prop to buy time for the West to prepare for this Ukraine moment, for this Ukraine proxy war. So, in your opinion, who is being genuine about diplomacy and peace here? Is it Russia or is it the West? Because both of them are saying that they are, in fact, genuine, right? Putin has said many times, even of late, that he is willing to engage in talks, but of course not under circumstances where they're not serious from the other side. And the other side, the West, NATO, the collective West, and of course Zelenskyy and company, they're saying the exact same thing just on their end. So who's being genuine here, Dan, in your opinion?
My view is Russia is, and we can kind of move backwards in chronology here. We know now that sometime, I guess in March, there was probably a deal that Ukraine and Russia could have lived with, which honestly would have ceded most of the territory back to Ukraine. And that at that time, Prime Minister Boris Johnson went to Kiev and told Zelenskyy, don't sign it. In the same way, by the way, that the U.S. did in, I think it was 1992 in Serbia, it told the Bosnians, don't sign this peace deal, right? We ended the Lisbon deal, and then we ended up with this war, right? But we even go back further. I was just in Donetsk in November. And I can tell you the people of Donetsk who are happy that the Russians are there, they wish the Russians had intervened 8 years ago. And others in Russia want that. The second biggest party, the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, has been asking for 8 years for Russia to go in to protect Donbass. And I believe that the Putin government actually was very restrained. They did not want to do that. They could do that. Stephen F. Cohen, the late Stephen F. Cohen, one of the great Sovietologists and Russian historians, before he died, was saying Russia could take the Donbass like that. They don't want to do it. They don't want to have to do this. They don't want a war. These are their brothers. These are their sisters. They don't want to do this. And I think in the end, and I believe this, that Russia was forced into it. I think that we know, again, from the Organization of European Security and Cooperation, which is a 57-member organization that the U.S. is a member of. It's led by Germany. They reported, something like 2,000 ceasefire violations the weekend before Russia intervened in February. And most of those were by Ukraine against the people of the Donbass. It appears that, tens of thousands of troops were being amassed on the Donbass border by Ukraine to invade the Donbass. And I think from not just Putin's point of view, again, I think this idea of embodying all of Russia in Putin is ridiculous. He has a Security Council that has military leaders, Lavrov's on it. He didn't make this decision on his own. They decided either they're going to go in now or they're just going to wait for those troops that are amassed on the Donbass border to go into Donbass and then probably head right into Russia proper, right? And they decided we're not going to do it. We're not waiting. We're not going to do what Stalin did in 1941 and wait for the Nazis to just invade, right? We're going to take the battle to them. But I don't think they did it happily. I think they did it reluctantly. And honestly, the fact that this war's gone on as long as it has is because they've really prosecuted the war in a very cautious, reluctant fashion. They could have gone in much more heavy in the way NATO does whenever it goes in, with its shock and awe, and knocked out Kiev immediately. They didn't do it because they didn't want to do it, and they don't want to do it now. And they're paying the price for that decision. But all of that leads me to believe in my heart that Russia wanted a way out of this. They offered a way out of this. It was very reasonable before they intervened in February. Just tell us Ukraine won't be a member of NATO. Guarantee us that. Get Ukraine to stop attacking the Donbass, and we'll be done with it. And the West said, go pound salt. They had no interest in it. And we are where we are. So no, I think Russia wants peace. And I think it's the U.S. The U.S. more than anyone. The U.S. and to a lesser extent the U.K. They want this war. And they got it. And they're going to continue it for the reasons Scott said. They're going to fight to the last Ukrainian to try to weaken Russia in the same way that Brzezinski did in Afghanistan, right? Tried to fight to the last Afghan to undermine the Soviet Union, which honestly worked. By the way, everyone I met in Donetsk, and it's so funny, whenever you go abroad, people are so much more in tune with the world than Americans are, right? Every person in Donetsk, the first thing they mention is the Grand Chessboard by Brzezinski. All of them have read it from 1997, right? And they say, this is exactly the game plan Brzezinski had for us. And it's true. This is not a secret. This is the game plan. This is what's happened. So,
yeah, Scott, I want to definitely get your opinion on which side of this war you think is being genuine about peace, and also pose this to both of you. And Scott, you can answer first as well. What are the actual prospects for peace? Because I feel like we're also hearing so many different sides of what that could look like, and I have my opinions about who I think is actually serious about that and who is not. But I want to get your opinion also just on the prospects of what actual peace could and might look like, if that is even a possibility here.
Well, the first thing I'll start out is just again doubling down on what Dan just said about who is serious about diplomacy and who's not serious about diplomacy. Look, we can take this, we can go all the way back in time in history, but we don't have time for that. So I'll just go ahead and fast forward to 2008, when the administration of George W. Bush was talking about bringing Ukraine on board to NATO. This is after, of course, the United States promised Gorbachev that we wouldn't expand NATO 1 inch eastward. And of course, we lied, because that's all we do as a nation anymore is lie. William Burns, who today is the director of the CIA, but at the time he was the ambassador of the United States to Russia, wrote a memorandum. And he said, it's called "Niet" means "niet," no means no. He said, basically, when the Russians say no about NATO, they mean it. And I'll condense it down to the essence. If we go forward and invite Ukraine to join NATO, this will end up with Russia invading Ukraine, taking Crimea, taking the Donbass. Okay, the U.S. ambassador said this in 2008. February 2008 is when I think the memorandum was written. What did we do? I think in November, in the Bucharest summit meeting, we invited Ukraine to join. I mean, I don't want to say anything disparaging about too many people, but you were told exactly what was going to happen, and yet you did it anyways, which tells me you wanted it to happen. This isn't an accident. The United States knew that by inviting Ukraine into NATO, they were creating the conditions for a Russian action, which says that's what we wanted to happen from the start. So if that's the case, we would never engage in a serious fashion in any diplomacy that prevented that from happening. In 2014, after the coup or the revolution, whatever you want to call what happened in Kiev, I believe it was a coup orchestrated by the United States that empowered neo-Nazi elements to carry out ethnic and cultural genocide against the Russians, but that's just my opinion. The fighting in the Donbass, where these Ukrainian nationalist forces backed up by the Ukrainian military were trying to violently suppress the ethnic Russians who were in opposition to being culturally genocided. There was fighting going on. The Russians intervened on behalf of the ethnic Russians, and the Russian army actually had the Ukrainians in a bind. They had significant forces surrounded, and they were going to win this thing. It was done. It was over. Finished. До свидания. Goodbye. But the Ukrainians begged the Europeans to intervene. Angela Merkel intervened. She talks about it. It was the most hectic moment of her life, she said, traveling to and fro everywhere, begging Putin, please, please, please come to Minsk. We promise peace. Putin's going, but I'm winning. I'm going to win. But you want peace, don't you? You're a peaceful man, don't you? Let diplomacy work, won't you? And Putin went, okay, we'll do it. They signed the Minsk Accords. The Russians did everything they could to make the Minsk Accords work. It was the Europeans and the Ukrainians that had no intention. We know Petro Poroshenko outright said it's a sham to buy time for what? For NATO to build a Ukrainian army capable of defeating the Russian army. I mean, if we go back to William Burns' memorandum, that if you invite Ukraine into NATO, there will be a war with Russia. So what is the West's position? To build a Ukrainian army capable of waging a proxy conflict with Russia. It's what they wanted from the very beginning. What they wanted from the very beginning. This was the plan. Angela Merkel now admits that exactly was the plan, to buy time for NATO to train a Ukrainian army capable of defeating the Russians. So now we come to February 2022 and Russia's invasion. And everybody says that it was an unprovoked act of aggression. Unprovoked? Really? No, it was the most provoked act of aggression one can imagine. And they say it was a violation of international law. I'm not a lawyer. Dan, you are. I'm going to throw out a little scenario here. And anytime you think I'm wrong, you just do this and I will shut up. Okay? But there is this thing called Article 51 in the United Nations Charter. There's two ways you can go to war under the United Nations authority. One is a Chapter 7 resolution passed by the Security Council of the United Nations that authorized military force to be used to bring peace to a certain situation. We did that in the Desert Storm, the war I fought in, Chapter 7 authorization. Totally legal war. A lot of people aren't happy with it. I understand it, but I didn't violate international law. Everything I did was approved by the United Nations Security Council. The other one is Article 51. This is self-defense. Now, people are going to say, self-defense, Ritter? How could Russia claim self-defense in going into the Donbass? Well, why don't I just pull out the NATO playbook from 1999? All right, 1999, Serbia, Kosovo. Because what NATO said is that they are carrying out preemptive self-defense under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. Preemptive meaning that there is an imminent threat of such a degree that you must respond preemptively before it can attack you. Now, people are going to say, but NATO is not a member of the United Nations. How could they possibly cite the United Nations Charter? Because NATO was part of what they call a collective security arrangement that included United Nations members. Therefore, the charter applied. So NATO claimed that the Serbs were carrying out genocide against the Kosovars, and that this genocide was of such a degree that NATO had an absolute requirement to intervene preemptively to stop the genocide, and that's what it was. Preemptive, collective self-defense under Article 51. Russia did the same thing. I mean, the Russians aren't stupid. They're very legalistically minded. So you had Donetsk and Lugansk, the two breakaway republics, declare their independence. So the first thing that does is this turns it away from a Ukrainian civil war, so to speak, which Russia couldn't intervene in that because this is an internal Ukrainian problem. But now they declared independence. And then Russia recognized that independence. And then Russia entered into a collective security arrangement with these two independent entities. So now they have a collective security agreement where the Ukrainian threat is declared to be so imminent that Russia has to preempt it. I think there's something called the Caroline Doctrine, dating back to 1836, when a U.S. ship was bringing Canadian rebels over into New Brunswick, and the British attacked it. And we said, you can't attack us. And they said, we preempted you from providing the support to the Canadians. And that Caroline Doctrine which was, I think, solidified by a decision by William Webster, a Supreme Court justice of some note, is carried on today. We cite it today. The Russians, ironically, cited it in their justification for this. But Russia has done nothing but obey the rule of law. This is not unprovoked aggression. This is honest to God, legitimate, preemptive, collective self-defense under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. And what gives them even more credibility now is that we no longer have to say, what are you talking about? There was the Minsk Agreement. There was some We now know that the Minsk Agreement was a lie, a sham, a diplomatic sham to build up a NATO army for the purpose of attacking the Russians. And we know that the United States predicted this, but engaged in the policy anyways to create just this outcome. So the Russians have the strongest case imaginable. Any court of law of proper jurisdiction and properly manned with properly trained people would agree that Russia has a legal case for what they have done in Ukraine, plain and simple, which tells you there's only one party that's playing this game true, playing this game right. Russia sought a diplomatic solution all the way up to the bitter end. Vladimir Putin acknowledges now that he made a mistake, that he should have continued to fight in 2014, and he will never make that mistake again. So now I come to the last answer of you. What's the prospect for peace? There is no chance in hell that there will be peace in Ukraine. None. Why? Who are the Russians going to negotiate with? Germany? Never again. France? Ha. America? No. Ukraine? Never. There is no partner out there that Russia would ever trust. Russia made this mistake once. They trusted the collective West once in 2014. Had they finished the job in 2014, we wouldn't have this mess today. They will never trust another. Plus, remember this, Russia didn't go through the pain of mobilizing 300,000 reservists just to quit. They mobilized for a reason, and that reason is to win the war. The way this war ends is with Russia dictating unconditional terms of surrender to a defeated Ukrainian nation. End of story. And the way this conflict ends, because this conflict is bigger than the war in Ukraine, is a defeated NATO and Europe recognizing the absolute necessity to agree to a new security framework for Europe, this thing that Russia's been pushing from the very beginning, a treaty that recognizes respective spheres of influence and works to deconflict the two sides, etc. Russia's going to be dictating those terms to NATO as well. And you say, well, wait, is NATO being beat? Every day NATO's being beat. Their armies are being eviscerated, not by their manpower dying, but by their equipment. And we now know that NATO is just an empty shell. It's a paper tiger. Germany held an exercise. 18 out of 18 new Puma infantry fighting vehicles broke down, don't work. Let me tell you something else. All the German Leopard tanks that Ukraine's saying, please give me Leopard tanks. Hey, Ukraine, they don't work either. They're in the barracks for a reason, because they can't start. They had to cannibalize a whole bunch of them just to get 50 to send to Lithuania as part of this battle group. Now you want a brigade? Sorry, can't do it. We haven't maintained them. We haven't been preparing for war. We're Germans, but we don't know how to fight. And that all of NATO's that way. The only nation that's prepared to fight is the United States, but we don't have sufficient forces to actually put a credible military power on the ground in Europe capable of standing up to the Russians. You think the brigade of the 101st Airborne Division currently in Romania is going to do the job? 4,700 light infantrymen with helicopters going in against a heavy armored, heavy artillery environment? They'll all die. All their helicopters will be shot down. How about the heavy armor brigade in Poland, Scott? I don't know. They got 18 artillery pieces. 18 going up against what, 800? You really think America's going to win that fight? Well, what about the American Air Force? They're very good, aren't they? They're not that good. They spent the last 20 years bombing villagers in Afghanistan and Iraq with no air defense system. They're not trained to do this, and they're going to go up against the most lethal integrated air defense system in history. What the Russians have put in, we'll lose our Air Force on day one. So, this war doesn't end anything other than total Russian victory. And the Russians aren't in the mood to negotiate that away. They have positioned themselves to win. And I think they're going to win. And I don't think they're going to give that away at the negotiating table. They're tired of the West. All the West does is lie.
Yeah, I want to kick it to you, Dan and Scott. You can definitely close maybe the interview portion of this stream with this question, given that, because I definitely agree with that. I definitely agree with the assessment that they're really just what objectively is in front of us. It just doesn't make any sense for Russia, right, to negotiate with, especially, right. You were talking about the examples in the past of the West using international law for its own interests in places like Iraq. There is nothing in Russia's interest that makes it say, well, I am going to now sit down with the collective West, because that's who it would have to be with, and negotiate when we already know how many times have they lied, as you said, Scott. So I want to ask you guys about the significance of this globally, right? Because oftentimes we talk about Ukraine, what's happening there, who's going to win that conflict. But this has global ramifications for Europe and everywhere else in the world, Africa, Asia. I want to ask you what your opinion on this is, because it feels like Russia is standing up to the West in a way that many countries before Russia, especially since the fall of the Soviet Union, have not been able to do, because they just did not have the capabilities militarily, politically, in terms of their weight in the international order. So, Dan, I want to ask you first this question, and Scott, you can close it out. What do you think about the global significance of what's happening with Ukraine, given where this is all going?
Well, I think this is the most significant event we've seen since the collapse of the Soviet Union. There's the Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. We live in interesting times, my friends. And what this bodes is the creation of a multipolar world for the first time since 1991, since the Soviet Union collapsed. And it's very interesting. I think you make a good point, Danny. I mean, I think the reason that, despite the fact that the U.S. claims, the world is on our side and on Ukraine's side against Russia, it's actually not true. Most of the world's on Russia's side. If you look at Africa, Latin America, Asia, most of those countries, most of the world population-wise is either openly supportive of Russia or they're basically keeping silent because they don't want to upset the West, but they are quietly applauding Russia. And why? For the reason you said. Because certainly since 1991, the U.S. and NATO have had their way with the world. They've invaded countries at will, mostly without Security Council authorization, sometimes with, but they did whatever they pleased in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Serbia, and the world saw this happening and couldn't stop it. And now, as you said, Danny, Russia has drawn a line in the sand and said, we've had enough. You're not going to get your way anymore. We will defend our homeland. And I do think this is defending the homeland. So I will see and raise, Scott, on the issue of the self-defense. I just want to point out, yes, it was collective self-defense in that they were defending the Donbass, that, as you mentioned, had a referendum, declared independence. Russia recognized them, pointed to the International Court of Justice advisory opinion on Kosovo, which found Kosovo was, could declare independence without a referendum, right? And so Russia said these are even better circumstances for that. They declared collective self-defense. But in addition to that, Russia viewed this as defense of their own homeland. They knew if Ukraine invaded the Donbass en masse, they would not stop there. With NATO's support, they keep going into Russia. And when I was in Russia, again, I just got back right before December, people in Russia view this as they viewed Operation Barbarossa, as a invasion of Russia by not just Germany, but by the collective West, right? The West didn't open up a second front against the Germans till 1944. Russia was basically left to its own devices for 3 years to fight Nazi Germany. And they view this in the same way, that if they didn't engage in this attack, that they would be fighting NATO on their own territory. And so, and most of the world understands that. Africa understands that in their time of need, the Soviet Union supported Cuba to help liberate Southern Africa, right? And help overthrow apartheid, which Nelson Mandela recognized. People in the developing world have a residual sympathy for Russia because of what the Soviet Union did, one, in defeating Hitler, and two, in helping liberate the colonized world, right? And so they're supporting Russia now, and they're supporting them because Russia's doing what no one else did, as you said, Danny. They're fighting back, and they're defending themselves. The U.S. position has always been no one else has the right of self-defense but the U.S., right? Going back to Washington, if the Native Americans defended themselves, that was considered a terrorist act. They had to be punished. Same with the Vietnamese, right? The Vietnamese attack us on their own homeland. They're terrorists. They must be destroyed, even if you're a woman or a child, right? The Russians are saying, no. We're not playing by those rules anymore. We have a right to self-defense. The Russian ethnics in Donbass have a right to self-defense, and we're going to exercise it. And most of the world recognizes that. This marks the birth of a multipolar world, and we are witnessing it. We are living in interesting times, and honestly, I consider it a blessing. I want to see the birth of a multipolar world. I just hope we avoid a nuclear conflict in the meantime. That's what I have to say.
Yeah, Scott, what are your thoughts? Oh, sorry, you're muted. Oh no, his mic.
There we go.
There we go.
I was coughing, so I didn't want you guys to hear my my struggle with my body. But no, I agree. Ditto everything Dan just said. I'll just put a little bit of my spin on it. This conflict is more than just what's happening in Ukraine. The United States made it that kind of conflict when we sought to sanction Russia, understanding that Russia is a global economic power. I mean, I just always laugh when people, when idiots, and God bless John McCain, and I hope you're doing well wherever you're at, buddy. But he's not my buddy, by the way. But this is a guy who helped coin the notion of Russia being nothing but a gas station disguised as a country. Or, yeah, I think that's it. A gas station disguised as a country. And Lindsey Graham has picked up on that, riffed off it, so have other people. And that's okay. I mean, but you don't want to be a Humvee on a superhighway in the middle of nowhere in weather like there is right now, running out of gas, in need of that gas station. You see, Russia's not just a gas station, they're a global gas station. They have connectivity throughout the entire world. The energy security framework of the entire globe is fully integrated into Russia. So when you say we're going to sanction Russia, to do that properly, you need the entire world to play, and the entire world isn't ready to play. They don't want to play. Not only that, Russia was able to play it back. I mean, you can't be Europe and say we're gonna stand up to Russia, and we're not gonna buy any Russian gas. Okay, what gas are you gonna buy? Well, America's promised to help us out on that one. Well, America's promise is worth what it's worth to everybody else. Nothing. What has America done? Watched you suffer, watch your businesses collapse, watch everything go down, and then step in with American liquid natural gas, which you can't afford, by the way. And the end result is your economy is in tatters. So Russia's winning the economic sanctions conflict. The fact is they've won it. I just laugh every time the European Union, we're going to put our ninth tranche of, that's a fancy diplomatic term, ninth round. Let's call it a boxing match. Your ninth round. Dude, you lost all other 8 rounds. Why don't you just do the honorable thing and resign? Because now you're a helpless target and the Russians are just landing free punches left and right. It's over, Europe. You lost. You stink. You're bad. You're horrible. You got beat. In America, you too, except America is playing a dirty double game. If I were the Europeans, I'd start to question, is America really a friend worthy of the name? And the answer is no. I mean, America literally helped coordinate the attack, either did it or directed it to be done on a $12 billion piece of critical energy-related infrastructure. German, by the way, but also European. Blew it up, destroyed it. Not embarrassed about it at all. America sat back and watched your entire continent collapse and sort of gloat as your heavy industry starts to migrate towards the United States. Because, of course, we have cheap energy. You don't. America's not your friend, Europe. We've never been your friend. We're never going to be your friend. You exist only as an economic colony of the United States. So long as you're able to serve to the economic benefit of America, we find you useful. When you don't, we will abandon you just like we are right now. And because this is an economic conflict, it's expanded in other ways. For instance, the G7. What is the G7? Basically the economic arm of NATO. Yes, I know Japan's there, but it's the economic arm of NATO, or the EU. The G7 is, talking a big game, but what is the G7? Let's subtract the countries. It's supposed to be the 7 best economies in the world. Well, I don't think the German economy is the best in the world anymore. So now it's the G6. But I don't think the French economy is that good either. Oh, it's a G5. Oh, wait, the Brits aren't doing too well either. It's the G4. The Italians, they're not doing too great either. Oh, it's the G3. But what are they going up against? Because they're talking about flexing their global muscles, promoting sanctions. They're going up against something called the BRICS Forum. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. But now we can add Iran. We can add Argentina, who have joined BRICS. We soon will add Saudi Arabia. Imagine that. And Turkey and other nations. Everybody wants to join BRICS. Why? Because BRICS is doing exactly what Dan is talking about, recognizing the inevitability and the desirability of a multipolar world. The world is tired of the American singularity. The world is tired of being dictated to by the United States. That age is coming to an end. The petrodollar is on the decline. Saudi Arabia is not only refusing to increase oil production, the whole relationship with Saudi Arabia and America has always been Saudi Arabia is America's gas station. When we need more gas, Saudi Arabia pumps more. They overbuilt their oil production capacity. When we need less, they reduce it and they pay the price because, after all, America is providing security guarantees. But America can't give them security guarantees anymore. We've proven that vis-a-vis Iran. So the Saudi Arabians are jumping ship. They're now taking money for their oil in currency other than the dollar. They're also not picking up the phone when Biden calls and begs to increase oil production to manage oil prices around the world. Saudi Arabia, no, we're going to decrease oil production. When the United States worked the Europeans to put a cap on the price of oil, the Saudis went there, but for the grace of Allah, go us, meaning that once you allow a cap to be put on, they can put it on anybody, including the Saudis. The Saudis said, no, we're not going to support that. None of the energy producing world accepted this notion. America has failed every step of the way. Why? Because the forces of history are unstoppable in this case. The world is gravitating towards a multipolarity that the United States will be a part of. You can't make America disappear. You don't want to make America disappear. But America will no longer be the singularity. America is going to be one of many. And that's going to be a very difficult transition for the United States to make, but it's one that we have no choice to make because it's happening as we speak.
Yeah, well, I think this is a great place to conclude the interview portion of this stream. Thanks so much, Dan and Scott, for joining me. I'm going to stick around for another 30, 45 minutes, so please do stick around. But I did want to share, you two are actually speaking at the beginning of the new year together. And
Yes,
I believe in Albany paper. I'll put that up right now before you guys go, so everyone knows where to find it. So you will be in Troy, New York, which is a very working class city, upstate New York. And I believe this is being held by the James Connolly Forum, and UNAC is sponsoring it. And I don't know if you one of you or both of you want to just speak about the event. It's January 6th of next year. We're coming up. And here's the address, but I'll kick it to you guys, and then you guys can also plug whatever you want as well.
I'll just say it's my honor to appear with Scott. I was saying before our conversation, I've admired Scott for a long time for opposing the war in Iraq in 2002, 2003. And I think this will be a great event. So if people can come live, please come. Or if you can view it on video, please do that. And check out my books. I have one on Russia, The Plot to Scapegoat Russia. Please check that out. I have a new one on Nicaragua coming out early next year, Nicaragua, History of U.S. Intervention and Resistance. And with that, thank you, Danny, and thank you, Scott. Again, big honor for me to be with both of you today.
Well, thank you. I mean, thanks for organizing this, Danny and Dan. It's a pleasure to meet you this way, and I'm sure we're going to make sure you bring copies of your books. I want to buy your book and get you to sign it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And I'll bring a couple of mine, including the most recent one, Disarming the Time of Perestroika, arms control at the end of the Soviet Union, which has a relevance to today because when people talk about how do we get out of this mess, I always remind people that the 1980s was pretty bad too, between the United States and the Soviet Union. And yet through the vehicle of arms control, through the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, we created a bridge to get us away from nuclear conflict towards at least beginning the process of working together cooperatively. Yes, we fumbled the ball badly. There's no more INF treaty, but it doesn't mean that we can't try to recap that spirit going forward. So that's the book. But I definitely look forward to meeting with Dan, working with Dan, talking with Dan, and I think it's going to be a very empowering evening. One of the things that I always say is knowledge is power, and guys, you're going to get a lot of empowerment if you come on January 6th, not necessarily from me, but definitely from Dan Kovalik.
No, thanks.
All right. Well, thanks so much to both of you for taking the time out. We'll have to do it again in the new year. And both of you take care, and everyone stick around because I'm going to be sticking around for another 45 minutes. Bye-bye, guys.
Bye. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
All right. So, all right, everyone. That was an amazing conversation. I think we have 2,600 viewers here. Some of you all decided to stick around. Please do, because I'm going to cover one story, actually, to kind of piggyback off of what Scott Ritter said about NATO being a paper tiger. Well, there's new data as to what Scott was saying that you'll want to stick around for. But I wanted to first say that this is the holiday season, all right? So everyone's asking for something. But I do want to say that I just got an update today, or actually this past week, a couple of days ago. So my wife is a nurse. That's part of how I survive doing independent media. She's actually going on strike here where I'm located, and they don't have a strike fund. So that's going to be very interesting how that goes. And so, for this holiday season, there is no better gift than supporting independent media. And with that said, you can do that. The best way is on Patreon at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the description, but there are so many other ways. You can join as a member of this YouTube community here on this channel. That has been growing quite nicely, and it's a great community. And I make sure to shout all of you out when you all are here during the streams at the end of the program. Here, I already see someone there from the YouTube member community. You can also join on Substack annually. I do update my Substack when I go live. I also publish articles. I write about once or twice a month now. And so you will get those there as well as in other platforms. But you can do that, and there's also one-time options. So find all those and the links in the description. It is the holidays, and I just found out that news, which is very exciting. I'm very much in solidarity with her. But as you know, we are in an economic crisis, and independent media is woefully underfunded because platforms like this do not have big donors. I am not a part of some corporate media outlet. I do not have that kind of sponsorship. I do all this work primarily on my own with some very generous help from a few others. But with that said, that's how you can support this work. And yeah, stick around with me for another 30 minutes or so, because I also do analysis. One announcement, I'll get through the announcements now because I think more of you will be here than later. So now, please do consider tomorrow I'm going to be doing a special stream where I'll be answering Super Chat questions, Patreon member questions, as well, YouTube member questions, and answering some of the haters. I think, the holiday season definitely gets us thinking about our oppressors, our exploiters, and our haters as well. And so I'm going to answer some claims there just for some, good conversation. And, also cover a few stories as well. So tomorrow evening, as well, a special Christmas Eve stream, I will be live, and I will make sure that is public, and I will be sharing that around. But it will be around 9 p.m. Eastern time, maybe a little earlier, maybe 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. So do set your calendars now, and we will, yeah. And we will have a good time, another good stream. All right. And so that will be actually the last stream of the year because I am going to be taking about a week off from streams. I have family coming in, and I cannot be live during that week from about the 26th through the 2nd of January. I should be back that week, though. So there will be clips published here, but you will not see me live for about a week starting after tomorrow. All right. So those are the big announcements. Also, I'm very happy to say that I'm waiting on copies of my book that was translated in China. I feel so honored. I wrote a book in 2019. You can see it right there, right behind me, American Exceptionalism and American Innocence, A People's History of Fake News from the Revolutionary War to the War on Terror. I co-wrote that with Roberto Servent, and it was translated in China. Somebody picked it up and said, wow, I really like this. I'm going to translate it. So I'm going to receive a couple copies of that. And I'm working actually in the Global Times, which Scott has contributed to as well. It is a Chinese media outlet. I am doing a dialogue with the translator, typed up kind of interview almost with them. And that will be out. I hope I'll get that done before the new year. So, with all that said, very exciting stuff. I love to hear the word strike. I love to hear that am being translated. All right, that's also that feels very, very good, and I appreciate all your support here. So I just want to cover one story, all right? Because honestly, Scott Ritter inspired this. I wasn't going to cover this necessarily, but there are other stories I have for tomorrow. I did want to talk about um I want to talk about NATO being a paper tiger. Because one thing that's so interesting about NATO is that NATO has caused a lot of destruction around the world. So of course Ukraine isn't the first place that NATO has had a hand in mass destruction and mass death, right? We can go back to Yugoslavia, right, in the 1990s. That was a really long war, but NATO got incredibly involved in 1999 at the tail end of Bill Clinton's administration. Waged a bombing campaign on Serbia that destroyed and split up. It was like the death knell of Yugoslavia, and that socialist republic killed thousands of people and basically helped to facilitate the conditions that we see today with NATO expansion. It was a huge deal when it came to NATO expansion as well, because it laid fertile ground for it. And so we know that NATO intentionally bombed infrastructure, water, schools, hospitals, you name it, and destroyed that independent country. And then NATO was also heavily involved in Afghanistan. It was heavily involved in the Iraq invasion. NATO has been involved in so many of the US's wars. This includes also Libya, which is probably in at least the 21st century what we think about first when we think about the last decade or so of NATO. The 2011 invasion of Libya, where NATO provided air cover for US proxies, right? These US, Qatar, Saudi, Israeli, right, proxies that were armed by intelligence agencies, armed by NATO itself, and then NATO provided air cover to destroy the country again, targeting schools, hospitals, residential areas, targeting civilian infrastructure, killing tens of thousands, and also helping to facilitate the movement of refugees, a refugee crisis, really unseen in human history to this point. And then we can go on to Syria, right? NATO didn't necessarily get what it wanted in Syria. We see around this time, 2011, NATO's character as a paper tiger became more and more clear because it couldn't defeat Syria. And of course, who stepped in to help Syria? It was Russia. So NATO has been a paper tiger for quite some time. And so Scott Ritter is 100% right. And NATO is in big trouble because NATO has basically always been an instrument of U.S. imperial power. Now, NATO is just like the United States' military apparatus as a whole, found itself outstretched. And you can hear this in The Guardian. You can hear this in the New York Times. You can see, definitely check out Brian Berletic's latest video today, where there are many admissions in The Guardian and places like that, saying that actually one of the big reasons why the United States is hesitant to give Ukraine everything it wants, why the United States is not going to dig into its stockpiles in the way that Zelenskyy wants, is because it finds itself worried that it will become so outstretched that its so-called threats elsewhere, for example, in Yemen, they cite, well, how can we arm the Saudis in their war on Yemen, which is to us very profitable and also maybe perhaps winnable, although I don't think the Saudis are going to win that war. It feels like Saudi Arabia's own Vietnam situation. But nonetheless, the United States wants to keep arming that conflict. And then, of course, there's the Asia question, the pivot to Asia, the fact that the U.S. has also this dual goal of containing China and of basically pursuing a similar military policy that it is with Russia toward China. And in order to do that, well, you need to be able to send South Korea, Japan. You need to be able to send massive weapons to these countries, right? You need to be able to build these military alliances with these weapons. That's how you build the dependency. That's how you build up the capabilities. And so the United States is saying, well, we can't build up those capabilities if all of the weapons are going to Ukraine and they're being used up at literally, this is the word that the New York Times uses, alarming rates. And that's because it is very much alarming. So the fact of the matter is that NATO has met its match with Russia and, of course, with China, because no matter what the strategic concept says, NATO declared 6 months ago that China is also a malicious actor in the international order and that NATO has to start looking eastward toward China. And Stoltenberg has confirmed so much. It's covered on this channel within the last few months. NATO had plans for becoming involved in the so-called Indo-Pacific theater to try to contain China, but NATO can't do such thing because if it thinks it has difficulties with Russia, well, just wait until you meet a modernized military with 1.4 billion people supporting it behind it. Oh, and don't forget that China is the most prosperous economy in the world at this point in purchasing power parity terms, and it will be very soon in GDP terms. And oh, guess what? China is very much integrated in all of the West, the whole collective West's economic systems, as well as the United States. So you're talking about a major partner that you are saying you are going to wage a war against. It sounds suicidal. Well, that's because it actually is suicidal. So NATO is a paper tiger here because what can NATO do? NATO, of course, has to continue to follow the diktats of the military contractors, of Wall Street, of the corporate financiers that own NATO, right? These are those who actually control NATO. Sure, President Biden is the commander-in-chief, and sure, NATO is an instrument of U.S. imperial power, but who owns and controls U.S. imperial power? It's these forces. We talk a lot about neoconservatives here. Well, neoconservatives are the highest political expression of Wall Street, of the military contractors. The neocons are the highest expression of what it means to politically serve those interests. So that's the structure. That's how this all looks. And the problem for NATO is that it cannot possibly keep up with these goals. It cannot possibly meet these ends. There's no way that it can face up to Russia and China simultaneously because we're already seeing that it can't face up to Russia, right? And we're not even, so we haven't even added the China equation here, but we all know that it's coming. I had Claire Daly here. She's a member of the European Parliament. She said the European Parliament knows China is next. Everyone knows, if you're paying attention, that Ukraine is somewhat a project, a test run for what it would mean to do the same in Taiwan. And that's just facts. That's why they talk about it all the time. That's why these militarists are always talking about it. So we have to be able to connect those dots. But if NATO is being outstripped and outsupplied here, what do you think NATO is going to need to fight a war on behalf of the United States against China? Well, no, absolutely no chance in hell. There's no chance because the media, the Western media is already saying that the Ukraine conflict alone is draining NATO's armies. At this point, all that is left is U.S. stockpiles. And so the Western corporate media is admitting this. Here's a report from RT on the matter. Kiev's demand for weapons and ammunition has outstripped the available supply. The fighting in Ukraine has, quote unquote, exposed flaws in U.S. strategic planning and revealed significant gaps in the U.S. and NATO military industrial base, says the Washington Post this Friday, so today. As Kiev's forces consume more ammunition than the West can produce, the Pentagon seeks to cope by training them to fight more like Americans. Stocks of many key weapons and munitions are near exhaustion, and wait times for production of missiles stretches for months and in some cases years. And Brian Berletic said this in his report today on the Patriot missiles, that actually what's happening with Lockheed Martin and Raytheon and these corporations is they have to increase their production lines. That means building new facilities, renovating old facilities, bringing them up to speed, literally. If we're talking about capitalist production, that's how it works. And that can take years because now you have to build something new and you have to make sure that everything is fine and okay. You have to put in the capital, you have to get the builders, you have to get the contracts, all of that. That takes a lot of time. And so here the Washington Post is saying, yeah, it could take years. And so the Post noted, as part of a narrative about how the U.S. has funneled some $20 billion in military aid to Kiev just this year, only $6 billion of that has been in new weapons contracts, while the rest came from the Pentagon stockpiles. The U.S. military-industrial complex can make about 14,000 rounds of ammunition for the 155mm howitzers, the Post quoted U.S. Army Secretary Christine Wormuth, while Ukrainian forces go through about 6,000 a day during heavy fighting. So that means in 2 days, a little over 2 days, Ukraine has exhausted all that the U.S. military-industrial complex can produce in rounds of ammunition. Think about that. How can Ukraine win that? Tell me. Tell me how Ukraine can win. And so that's why it's so important to understand that this isn't about winning for the United States, for NATO. They know this. It's not about winning. It's about their overall global political and imperial agenda. It's about domination. It's about their hegemony. Ukraine be damned, really. Ukraine be damned. They know Ukraine is damned. When Joe Biden said, you're not going to get all those weapons from me, he was basically saying, yeah, and we don't care what happens to you. And that's not because Joe Biden doesn't have a soft spot for those so-called democratic Ukrainian officials and the people of Ukraine and all of this. I'm sure, right, in the addled mind of the political class, especially as addled as Joe Biden is in the West, in the United States, sure, they probably do believe that this is a crusade for quote unquote democracy over autocracy. But underneath the ideology, what really rests is the actual interests of this empire, which is not democracy, but just to plunder, just to destroy, just to take and take and take. And so Russia is now just the next target of that, and one of the biggest targets of that agenda. So the U.S. military-industrial complex is, quote, in pretty poor shape right now, end quote. Seth Jones of the Washington-based think tank Center for Strategic International Studies told the Post. We are really low, and we're not even fighting, Jones said, adding in scenarios where the U.S. is facing Russia or China in a conventional conflict, quote, we don't make it past 4 or 5 days in a war game before we run out of precision missiles, end quote. So there you go. They're admitting it. In that think tank, right, the Center for Strategic International Studies. Sorry, I got it turned around. That's a State Department funded think tank. That is a think tank funded by the United States and Western governments to forward U.S. and Western imperial policy, mainly U.S. imperial power. And it's admitting that they cannot win against Russia and China at this stage, especially with the situation going on in Ukraine. So the biggest geopolitical battle for them, the end game, because this is the end game. The end game is not Ukraine. The United States and NATO could care less about Ukraine. The end game is destabilization of Russia, regime change in Russia. The end game is regime change in China, destabilization of China at some point in the future through a similar Taiwan-based conflict. That's the end game of all of this, really. And it's not just Ukraine, it's not just Taiwan, but it really is the entire spectrum, the entire sort of medley of U.S. imperial policy right now. It is what the United States is doing by escalating and building more military bases in Asia, militarizing Africa, attempting to destroy whatever semblance, whatever is left of sovereignty in Latin America, right? Trying to undermine all of the governments there pursuing sovereignty. And we can go on and on and on. That's the point. The point is to lead up to the destabilization of Russia and China. All of it points to that. Syria points to that. Iran points to that. The road to killing and maiming and destabilizing the axis of resistance around the world goes through Russia and China. Iran, the DPRK, Venezuela, countries like this are very important, and I'm not minimizing their importance, but it's all about cutting off the heads of what they see as the heads of the axis of resistance, that's China and Russia. So that's the end game. Washington's allies in Europe are in similar shape. The Wall Street Journal reported on Thursday. Mikkel Strad, owner of the Czech ammunition conglomerate, said Ukraine chews through 40,000 rounds a month, while all the European NATO members put together can produce 300,000 per year. European production capacity is grossly inadequate, Strad said, adding that would take up to 15 years to restock at current production rates if the conflict were to somehow end tomorrow. So, in other words, that magnificent Western civilization, that imperialist albatross, that empire that was said. What did the UK form? The British Empire say the sun never sets. Well, actually, it seems like the sun has set on Europe's military power. Which, if Europe doesn't really have any military power left, then Europe, in effect, is kind of over. I mean, in terms as an imperial project, now it can only but be what? A vassal state, right? It can be a vassal entity for the United States, which still has definitely a hardcore, expansive military power. But even the United States is a paper tiger, given that itself, it doesn't fight wars like Ukraine is demanding it fight a war. The United States doesn't want to fight wars like that. That's why it's saying, hey, cool it, Zelenskyy. You need to fight more like us. You need to figure out how do we build certain kinds of unconventional warfare. How can, take advantage of drone technology, take advantage of sanctions. You need to learn that this is not just about throwing weapons at Russia, because that's not going to work, because we can't produce enough to maintain this huge empire. If the United States alone said, all we care about is destabilizing Russia through this conflict in Ukraine, and it pulled back all of its military hardware from everywhere else, then sure, maybe it could overcome and overpower Russia. But that's not how the American empire works. That's not how imperial power works. You can't do that, because if that were to happen, the empire would fall tomorrow. Why? Well, because countries like Venezuela, like Syria, like Yemen, they would take advantage of that, and they would win their respective wars, whether it's the proxy wars that we see, whether it's Yemen in an outright military struggle with Saudi Arabia, whether it is China, right? If the U.S. were to pull all of its military power and occupation forces out of Asia, China would have no problem increasing its influence. I'm not even talking about military, but everything, economic and political, right? Countries would be free to weigh the options more fairly, right? Should I go with China? Should I go with the United States economically, politically? What should I do? Well, countries would more likely start to fall on the China side of life if they aren't already there to a great capacity, because we know that Asia has very mixed feelings about the U.S.'s military campaign against China. Huge mixed feelings. But if those mixed feelings would turn into just straight up opposition if it wasn't for the fact that the U.S. has stationed itself in Asia to threaten not just China, but its so-called allies. That's really what it is. Do what we say. So Moscow has repeatedly warned that the U.S. and its allies shipments of increasingly modern long-range weapons could lead to a direct confrontation between Russia and NATO, and accused the West of prolonging the conflict and causing civilian deaths in Ukraine. While Western officials have demanded a ramp-up of production for months, recent EU legislation blocked many investments into weapons manufacturing by designating it, quote-unquote, not sustainable, according to the journal. Germany is now in the process of funding a factory in Romania that could produce both NATO and Soviet-caliber ammunition for Ukraine. The Pentagon is trying to deal with the problem by training Ukrainian troops to fight more like Americans and use different tactics. I think if we can train larger formations, companies, battalions on how to fight, how to employ fires, create conditions for maneuver, and then be able to maneuver like you've seen the U.S. military maneuver on the battlefield, then I think we're in a different place. Then you don't need 1 million rounds of artillery, a senior U.S. official who do not wish to be named told the outlet. So there you have the war machine basically telling the media that Ukraine just doesn't have it like that. Ukraine's military is not battle ready, and it can't fight unconventionally. It hasn't studied the manuals on guerrilla warfare like we have. It doesn't have special operations forces like we have. The United States learned from the anti-colonial movements of the 20th century that you cannot, right? It learned from Vietnam that you cannot just invade a country and expect, no matter how superior technology is, to have a good result. You need to understand that war is politics with bloodshed, and the key word is politics. How do you wrestle political control? How do you undermine the political system in that country? How do you ensure that you can wield your influence beyond the military so that your military campaign is stronger? And that's what Ukraine can't do. Why? Because Ukraine is a puppet regime. It is a weak puppet regime made up of bandits, of hard right, fascistic, fascist, neo-Nazis, and just legitimately Nazi forces. That's what a lot of the Ukrainian military forces are. And if they're not that, then they're just, a lot of them are criminals, people who have been in prison. A lot of them are desperate people. And of course, a lot of them are people that have been caught up in a conflict because they think it'll serve their long-term interests. So that it's just a lot of people not trained and hardwired for this kind of thing. And that's why NATO is a paper tiger, because NATO is relying on this kind of puppet government to achieve its objectives. And the problem with this is that puppet government has only one objective and that is to wage war with Russia. And it only has one way of doing that, which is basically putting on a blindfold and firing at anything that moves. That's what's been happening. And it is not going to go well. I mean, we've been saying this, and it's played out already, right? How many people have died? How much military has Ukraine lost? I mean, we're talking about, if you think about double of 100,000, 200,000, you're looking at upwards of more than half of that military, right? Over time. So those are huge losses. And then the weapons, those are huge costs. The U.S. military-industrial complex, the Western military-industrial complex, they don't want to see that, because on the one hand, yeah, you can dump money and dump weapons and contracts. The governments can do that to satisfy the profits of these weapons manufacturers. But if they just go on and waste all of them, then that puts a lot of pressure on these military contractors to do more and produce more, which could also increase and elevate the cost of production. That's just how production goes under capitalism. If you want to expand it, well, you got to lay some capital down to do so. If you want to expand it beyond your already existing means, that's just how it works. So NATO is a paper tiger, everyone. NATO's run out of weapons. The United States is not willing to give all of its capabilities to Ukraine, and surely it itself is running out of weapons. And then you also have these underlying issues like the economic situation, the geopolitical situation, not so favorable to NATO right now. You have an economic crisis in Europe. You have Bloomberg reported something like the energy crisis is going to last until 2026 in Europe, and that it already has cost Europe $1 trillion. And even though there's all of this supposed optimism in the Western corporate media, because in Europe there were these higher temperatures than normal, well, that's not 100% true, because the winter is going to come. It will get cold, but it's not even about the winter getting cold. It's about what is the capacity of Europe to take on other energy, LNG suppliers. And they've just started to get these, the capacity to take on like Qatari gas and US gas. But at the same time, that's only going to elevate costs, and it's going to increase competition. Now you have China's economy, right, transitioning from a zero COVID situation to essentially a non-zero COVID situation. So China's economy is also going to be competing for energy. So there's going to be a lot of competition, and Europe won't be able to really handle it, and they'll need to bid. They'll need to attempt to outbid others that are more prepared to pay, which means that Europe is going to see high prices for quite a long time. So you have the economic situation undergirding it. The United States' economy is always the paper tiger. We'll get more into that in the stream tomorrow on Christmas Eve. But the U.S. economy is a paper tiger, and it itself is, if it's not already in a recession, it's well on its way. I would argue that we've been in a recession since the pandemic began, since 2020, when there was a huge crash. But nonetheless, there will be a recession here in official terms. Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, you name it, they're all predicting it. Jamie Dimon, these parasites, they're all saying it. It's coming. It's just a matter of when, not if. So put that in there. Put that into the equation. That affects the ability of NATO to do what it does, right? To be able to expand the conflict. So really, NATO has met its match. It has facilitated a lot of the pain that's being inflicted on it. And Russia and China, Russia alone, will not be defeated by NATO. It's made clear that it's not going to allow it to happen. And here we are. We are in a situation where Russia is showing that actually NATO can't really defeat Russia. It couldn't do it economically through economic warfare, and it can't do it on the ground in Ukraine. It can't do it on the ground anywhere, right? Try to trigger Article 5 of NATO's constitution, NATO. Like, it wouldn't dare. Why? Because you have the nuclear question. You have a nuclear armed Russia. They don't want that smoke, and Joe Biden is willing to say it in a press conference with Zelenskyy right next to him, right? They don't want that. Why? Well, if you turn everything into nuclear dust, you also turn the system into nuclear dust. And that means you turn profits into nuclear dust. You turn hegemony into nuclear dust. It's just nuclear dust. That's the end, right? They don't want it to end. They want permanent war. They want permanent profits. They want maximized profits. They want maximal hegemony. That's the goal. And that goal has met all of those goals have met their match with Russia. And I talk a lot about China on this channel. Forget about it when it comes to China. The U.S. should just pack up its, just count its losses, but it won't. And that's the key thing. They won't stop. These forces will not stop, because while everything is saying, please do stop, right? The motion of history is like this big flashing warning. Do not do more of this because of economic catastrophe, possible nuclear catastrophe. But their train is going to continue to move in this direction unless the people stop it, unless people rise up, unless people say absolutely no more. We demand peace because we demand better for ourselves and for the people of the world, including in Russia, including in China, including everywhere else where the U.S. is waging a campaign of aggression of all forms. So that's the one story I wanted to cover this evening after the stream ended with the stream interview ended with Scott Ritter and Dan Kovalik. Amazing guests. Dan's actually a longtime friend. I'm so glad I've been able to get to know Scott a bit. But I've known Dan. Dan actually helped me publish this book, American Exceptionalism, American Innocence, by connecting me with the publisher that he uses with his books. He's written a lot of good ones. Surely, I'm a lucky guy in that way. I've met a lot of good comrades, a lot of good people out here doing good work for the cause of peace and really just for the cause of humanity, right? What is best for human beings at this time. And I want to just give quick shout outs to the super chats here and members as well. If you're a Patreon member, and thank you so much to Kendrick, who has just signed up on Patreon. Appreciate your support. But if there are Patreon members here, make yourself known in the chat on the bottom, and I will definitely shout you out as well. So let me just go and see. The chat is on fire. It is on fire. So I don't know if I'll even be able to get to all these super chats, guys. Amazing. Thanks so much for everyone who came today. All right. So yeah, happy holidays, everyone. I'm still scrolling up. So with that said, again, right, this channel is completely independent. This channel relies on viewers. It relies on those who support independent media. This channel is dedicated to anti-imperialism. It's dedicated to, geopolitics and to what it all means for us, right? I'm gonna get a lot into that in my Christmas Eve stream, so be sure to set the time. If you can make it in the evening Eastern time, it'll be around 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern, and I'll finalize that later. All right, special Christmas Eve stream where you can ask questions. I'll be prioritizing super chats, I'll be prioritizing patrons, and we'll go from there. All right, so we're getting to the beginning here. All right, everyone, let's see. We're getting to the beginning, right? We started this. Oh, actually, we still got some to go. So yeah, you all have been so generous tonight. Appreciate it. As I said, my wife is on strikes very soon, probably in the new year, which will be very interesting. I never got to go out on a strike. So you all might know that I have been in unions before in the social services sector, and I never got to go on strike. I was never a part of a union that was strong enough, big enough, willing, especially in my small shops. But this is exactly what my wife wanted. She is very much in the labor movement in all the good ways. She doesn't capitulate. She's not a leader. She's not about the leadership that capitulates to the war machine, capitulates to the financiers and the corporate bosses. She fights back hard. And she's also an anti-imperialist as well. So let's see. Let's see where we're at now. Okay, let's see. I think I see Bread and Circuses. Welcome. Thank you. Notification worked today. Thanks so much for being a member. All right. Appreciate you. I just want to give a shout out to the moderators too, to Big Teal, Loa Socialisti. Might be forgetting some others. I should look that up, honestly, though. I think I can find out who else I made mods. Where's in the chat here? Because I definitely want to give shout outs to the moderators. Let's see. Not everyone is here though, but I know Big Teal is here. I know Loa Socialisti is here. So thanks so much to all of you as well. And I'll get to that at the end maybe. So let's keep going to the super chats. All right. This was a great stream, everyone. I think we got up to over 3,000 viewers. We still got 1,700 going on strong well after. This channel is growing. It's been one of the things that I'm very proud of this year. I'm very proud about the work I've done here to make this channel go, to increase its viewership, and to make content that not only people want to see, but also I think is useful. And so amazing, right? Amazing. And I have all of you to thank for that. You all make this happen. You all make this work. All right, just scrolling. So yeah, I mean, this is impressive. This chat was on fire. Thank you, Mahmoud, I should say. Mahmoud Morandi. The entire time Zelenskyy spoke to Congress, I was picturing him playing the piano with no hands. So Mahmoud Mirhadi, I should say. Thanks so much for the super chat. And yeah, that's funny. I was picturing a whole lot of things. I mean, there's a picture of Biden, right, on his hand on Zelenskyy. Some people showed it on his butt. I don't know if that's real, if it was actually on his butt. All I gotta say is that he is a puppet. So I was just thinking about puppet master and puppeteer. But it's so funny because it's like gradations of puppets. It's like, yeah, Zelensky's a puppet of the Biden administration, of the U.S. political class, but Biden is a puppet of corporations and monopolies in the military-industrial complex. So it's really just degrees of puppetry, right? That's what we're looking at there. All right, so we're moving right along here, trying to see if there parse out any members, parse out any super chats. One thing I want to say again and again, I'm going to repeat the stream tomorrow. So be on tomorrow evening. Make sure you hit that notify me button when you see it, but subscribe and hit the notifications bell. It's that bell right after you hit subscribe to this channel. It'll be white, and then when you click on it, it'll turn dark. So you want to hit that notifications bell, and then you'll be notified when I go live. All right. I don't know if this chat is just going so fast that I'm missing super chats, or if there's just so many comments. Here we go. Super sticker from Corn Pop. Good to see you again, Corn Pop. He's a bad dude. He was a bad dude. Thank you so much for that super sticker. Oh, it went right to the bottom. Oh, gosh. Well, this is problematic. So I'm just going to scroll from the bottom down now. So busy. I know I might do this with these kind of streams, do just a video, but talking about what super chats talk about. But that's also just a lot of time. So I just do it at the end of streams because it's what I can manage. And I know that's not the most fun viewing, but I appreciate all of you who stick around. We have Keith with the super sticker. Thanks so much, Keith. I don't know if you're in Canada right now, but certainly you're using Canadian currency. So thank you so much. Elizabeth for the super sticker. Much appreciated. Thank you so much for that. Very good. Really appreciate all of the support, everybody. We're hitting 8:17. I want to try to finish this before 8:30, but we got so many comments. We got Stephanie with the super chat. She says, thanks for all your work. Let us know if we can also contribute to a strike fund for wife and other nurses. That would be very interesting to organize. I would definitely be down to do that once it gets going. Because yeah, that would be very good. I could definitely take the equivalent of the super chats and transfer that as well to them, and I could try to hold a stream that's dedicated to that when the time comes. That would be great. That'd be really good. Great idea, Stephanie. Organizing mind. I love it, and I appreciate the super chat. Thank you so much, Sam Ali, for the solidarity. Much appreciated. JM, thank you so much for being a now longtime member from the very beginning when I was able to open up the memberships. Thanks so much for lending a hand in supporting this channel. So that's what you can do as well. JM has been a member for quite a long time. Since I've only been having memberships for several months now, but definitely, I think it started this fall, I believe, or maybe the end of last summer. So definitely consider joining as a member on YouTube as well, because that's another way. Just hit that join button right on this video, and that's how you can support. So thank you again, JM, for that. All right. So we're moving right along here. We're getting within the hour of the stream, the first hour of the stream. So we're here we go. We have Wesley Monk. America needs to dock the USS Empire and just trade. Yeah, imagine. The problem for the American Empire right now, and I'll talk about this more tomorrow, the nexus between, because the Duran and Brian Barletic and others have talked about this, the relationship between deindustrialization and militarism. The problem is that the financialization of U.S. American capitalism and monopoly capitalism, if we're to be more specific in its monopoly phase, is that financial products aren't so attractive. Like you can't really trade that. And so the United States has relied upon military power to control supply chains so that its corporations can exploit labor abroad to increase their profits on behalf of financial shareholders, right? These Wall Street grifters, so to speak, grifting off of the real economy. They say, go abroad, exploit other countries, and here's the military power that will allow us to do it. And so to dock the U.S. empire would also threaten those interests, would surely create a lot of trouble, right? Politically, there would be a lot of instability, more instability than there already is. But I agree with the sentiment, Wesley. Definitely. I would love to see that, right? If we could, if there was a real anti-war opposition, real anti-war movement here that pressured withdrawal, even just a large percentage, which some have called for, right? A large percentage of the military budget, if that were cut, what ramifications that would have around the world would be very interesting to observe. And certainly I hope to see that in some capacity, in some form in my lifetime. And it's why I do this work, because I think this work can hopefully get a global consensus going around this, which I think is already developing, right? And I think that just the Western countries, the United States in particular, are just behind. They're behind. They really are. So I think I might have thanked all the super chats. I think I might have. Although someone contributed a large. Did I see it? The $50. Somebody here contributed $50. And I really wanted to say thank you, but I don't see them here. Yeah. See, I already went through this super chat. All right. So did I skip over it? I feel like it was more recent. Oh well. Thank you so much to that person. I can't find it anywhere. Because that was really generous. Really, really, really generous, everyone. So we are, coming to the end here. This is the home stretch, so to speak, of this stream. So tomorrow, yes, around 9 p.m. Eastern time. Don't just between 8 p.m. and 9 p.m. Eastern. I probably will go live. I'll probably do another hour and a half or so. Got a few stories, sure, but a lot of it will be answering questions, super chats. It'll be kind of like another kind of bid to build support, patron questions. I'm going to release that out into the Patreon community so you all can get your questions in. I try to prioritize them first, then YouTube, then super chats, and we'll have fun here. Answer some haters. I have heard, they're always haters, but I like to kind of play with these ideas, right? The big ones I'll be answering tomorrow are: do I not care about the American working class? Do I want to kill all white people? Right? Do I want to, whatever, right? Like there are a lot of things that are said about me that I think, I can answer just in a genuine way, and let the record speak for itself, right? That's kind of what I do. Is I do what I do, and you can judge based on that. And if your judgments are incorrect, in my opinion, well, that is what it is. I think that this is something that we all have to deal with, criticism, and criticism is just part of this. And I really, some of it is not good faith, some of it is not helpful, and I think to be able to debunk what that is, right? What is unhelpful criticism is important, because online culture has its own thing, because of the way it has developed, because of the way it is shaped. It's just one of the things you deal with. But I certainly enjoy sometimes hearing some of these criticisms I think are bad faith, being like, oh, what if I were to actually just talk about that? What if I were to just say, hey, do I not care about the American working class? They're probably referencing my opinion about patriotic socialism and stuff like that. But in the larger scheme of things, I'll put it in the context of what I find most important, which is this global struggle for multipolarity, for peace, and for self-determination, because I think that really is question number one on the order of the day for the entire world. And then everything else feels like it flows out of that, right? Because our immediate concerns are connected to those huge developments, and vice versa. It's all connected. That's the philosophy that I ascribe by, for sure. And so we can definitely talk tomorrow about that. Bring your questions, bring your comments, super chats, bring your Patreon questions, bring your if you're a YouTube member, bring your membership questions. And I'm going to prioritize those folks first. And we can do it big. We can do it big here. All right. So everybody, everybody, happy holiday weekend. I, for one, I'll give you my, tomorrow I'll give you more of my holiday spiel. I, for one, I celebrated Christmas all growing up. Just like most people who have struggled, I think, in life, the holidays have a very mixed, I think, effect on me. And I think one thing I'll just say to all of you is, when I say happy holiday and I say have a good rest of your 2022, I'm not saying you need to be, right? Because I think that's one thing we're always told: it's a Merry Christmas, it's so jolly, everything is great. Well, look at the real world. That's not the case. You have people suffering economically, suffering politically, suffering without power, suffering, languishing in prison, right? You had people like Matulu Shakur and Sundiata Acoli, these political prisoners of the Black Liberation Army, Black Panther Party. Richard Medhurst did a good video on COINTELPRO. They're victims of this assault, this war on political dissidents on the real left here in the United States. And, they get to celebrate out of prison, but they celebrate too late, right? It becomes the point where the U.S. is only releasing prisoners of their caliber, of their resume, when they are either about to die or essentially they have had a lot of their life stripped from them because of dementia and other medical conditions. That is the reality of the situation, is that, this isn't necessarily a happy time. I would say that I am hopeful for a future that is better for humanity because of people who are like you, who come to streams like this and say, I'm concerned about peace, I'm concerned about war, I'm concerned about empire, I'm concerned about injustice and oppression and exploitation. I am concerned about ending all of that. Surely there's a lot of hope in that. There's a lot of hope in political changes happening all around the world. There's hope in people resisting right here in the collective West. But at the same time, I'm not saying happy holiday, Merry Xmas, Happy New Year if I don't see you on tomorrow's stream, because you have to be. I think everyone should feel exactly what they should be feeling, and don't let the politicians and the corporate media and your family and whoever else gaslight you into thinking otherwise, right? That's not going to be helpful to anything, right? We got to get out of this there's a lot of people who have a lot worse times at this time. A lot worse. They go through a lot more of what they already are suffering. It happens right around this time. And so give yourself a break. We need all of you for this long struggle ahead. We need all of you healthy and able to participate for as long as you can in whatever way you can. So don't let any force gaslight you into thinking you got to be something at this time. All right, everyone. Take good care. And hopefully I'll see you all tomorrow for the special Christmas Eve stream. Hit that notifications bell, subscribe to the channel so that you are made aware. Bring your questions, super chats, YouTube members, please bring yourselves. Patreon community, please bring your questions. I will make a post about that for both of you to submit them. And have a good night and have a good rest of your Friday. Bye-bye.